Hi, everybody.
Hello.
I hear you, Pearson. I'll just wait for a bit here. Is anyone having an interesting week this week, or is it the same old for everyone? Hi, Bernice, you got to work. Hi, Pearson. This is always the time of the year I actually feel like I'm not a good citizen, because I don't get as pumped as others get about politics. I mean, I like to know winners and losers, but this is actually the only time I'm actually interested, is just to know who won and who lost. And I think probably most likely being a citizen requires more than just laughing at losers and cheering for winners. Probably. Steven, what about you? Did you get pretty invested in it?
No, not too much.
I mean, right? Because you have a 50-50 chance of either having wasted your time, right? Because you could get super pumped about the guy who lost, and I don't know. I mean, here's my problem. My problem is that when I was younger, I used to get really pumped about these candidates that would never make it past the one big contest day in March, right? So I'd get really entranced by the story, and then they never made it, right? And then you're like, well, geez, now it's now I got to take this other guy who I don't like as much, but seems more palatable to everyone else. I don't know. Maybe people that really like Trump were really happy because he didn't drop out after that March, right? He just kept going and going. Well, there's a statistical side to this aspect of the contest that I find enjoyable, but I don't know. Chance, do you get worked up about these things or not really?
Well, this is the first election I've ever voted in, because the last one I was 16 years old. So this is new for me. It's very interesting, but I'm taking a lot of political science classes, so all we ever talk about it.
Is that true? So in political science, I mean, I've only taken one political science class as an undergraduate. It's called American Political Thought. We never talked about politics. We only talked about the Federalist Papers. So it really sucked because I don't care about the Federalist Papers. So do you guys talk about politics quite a bit, or?
Yeah, every day, one person has to present the new current events. So we're
what does
always
that mean?
talking
Can you
about
present on whatever you want? So if I that old guy on the Big Island, right? Like Harry Kim. Can I just talk about Harry Kim? Or do I have to talk about relevant things?
it has to pertain to the class and ethics. So I have one class that's about Asian Pacific news, and then the other class is environmental politics. So the article or whatever news you present has to cater to that.
That's kind of a specialized topic, isn't it?
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, I don't know what I would say. I don't know. I probably broke a law. I actually had my youngest son fill out my ballot for me. I thought I'd get him involved, and I don't know. I didn't have to do it then. Um, I don't know. He's at this weird age though, where he's 7. I'm white. My wife is Asian, and so it's funny. He's like really like he's really latched on to the fact that he's Asian. So it sounds bad when I say this, but realize he's only 7, and I neither encourage nor discourage the behavior. But he said he was only going to vote for Asians. So like there's probably very good candidates. And they're probably incredibly good candidates. And then, so the only reason he voted for Biden was because Kamala Harris, what was it, like her father is Indian, right? So India, he asked me, is like, I guess it's like Southeast Asia, I guess, right? Like,
Yeah.
that sounds bad though. That's probably how bad people start, right? Like maybe Trump long ago said, I only vote for white people, or something just as extreme.
Well, in his defense, I guess if he's living here in Hawaii, it'll be probably hard to not vote for an Asian person. Just
Yeah,
because of
well, I mean, he had to vote
demographics.
for Megan Cow, who was less experienced than Stephen
Yeah.
Alm for prosecutor,
That's
and
true.
he voted for Amamiya or Amamaya, or he voted for that guy instead of the guy with the last name of the B. What was the other one he did? Oh, and he voted yes on all resolutions, on all amendments.
Oh, he
So
was against Blangiardi?
yeah, he voted. He did not vote for Blangiardi. He voted for Amamiya or
Blangiardi?
Amamaya. Yeah.
Yeah.
So setting them up for it. Sorry, just waiting here. Wait for another minute or two. Chelsea, what about you? Do you get pumped about elections, or you don't care?
Maybe just only this year.
Yeah. Did you get really pumped about it, or?
Kind of.
Okay. Are you enjoying these next 2 days while they try to figure out who won, or does it make you nervous?
Kind of nervous because anybody could win at this point.
But don't you feel like it's all so far away? Like, oh, it seems like we're like looking at another country, looking at their problems, right, and saying, "Man, it must suck to live there."
Yeah.
I don't know. This is why I liked living on an island. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't be so blasé about it. I have an vested interest in Biden winning. If Biden wins, then UH probably will get a bunch of money, and I don't have to listen to my bosses yell. I don't know. Is anyone in here else? I mean, I know Chance. I know your mother works for UH. Is anyone else, like their parents work for UH or anything else like that? No. No. Today I had to hear. I don't know. I would think it's a rumor. I don't actually think it's true. But the way that the administration like does things is they scare people. They say like the most extreme thing they possibly can, so that when it comes time for them to say something else, it doesn't seem so bad because it's not as bad as the other thing they just said. Right? You get what I mean? So the thing they said to us today, which I thought was so extreme that I'm going to even say it, and then I'll actually start class. I see someone is chatting. I'll make sure I'm not forgetting anything. Okay. The thing I read, the email I got today that sounded so extreme, it almost makes one say, okay, yeah, sure, whatever you want to do, I'll do it. I just don't want this to happen. This is what was told to me today. Who is it? Worst case scenario. So this is what they say. Worst case scenario, UH West Oahu will close. Students will be reabsorbed into the UH system as a whole, and UH West Oahu faculty and staff would move to the community colleges, and others would lose their jobs. Like, what the fuck is that supposed to be? Like, that sounds like a pretty bad worst case scenario, and it seems like we're pretty far from that step. But anyway, I don't know. I think it's people. I don't know. It's like, I think it's like your parents saying, like, you're gonna go to bed without dinner. Like, you're not gonna go to bed without your dinner. Like, no parent would do that to their child, or they probably shouldn't. Okay, now this is where Steven then admits that he went to bed without dinner because of his parents, and now I've made him sad. But Steven, it wasn't probably a good meal day anyway. Hey, how about this, Steven? What was, as a kid, what was your favorite dinner night as a kid growing up? I already know mine.
Like macaroni and cheese was always good.
Yeah. Mine was fish nuggets and tater tots. That was always my favorite. Or breakfast night at dinner time, even though it was the same breakfast foods you'd get in the morning. But at dinner time, you know. Okay. Thank you, Pearson. Okay, so as you all know, the first half hour is generally a little noisier, and then we'll transition to my wife being back, and all will be well in the world. I would say about half of you are through the Bloomberg market concepts, and then I would say there's a sizable portion of you that are working through the CFA materials. I would encourage you to once we wrap up this Bloomberg market concepts part, to then start tackling the CFA thing. I very quickly want to show you just to clear up any confusion about this. Multiple people have asked me about this, and I've tried to reply to it the best way I could, but so if you're in Bloomberg market concepts, let's say, so mine are showing completed as they're completed. When you are in one, Bernice, I think it was you, right? You're the last one, I think, who asked me about this. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you're in this, mine show completed because, like, if it said in process still, I would have to go to resume. And in my case, mine's all done. But if it wasn't done, it's just going to repeat the very last part of this module. So then I would let it play.
To sum up, the three
Okay, so we'll just wait for this to
from
play. But the key idea here is that,
GDP
Bernice, when it's
growth
doing
is
that,
the
in
main
the,
yardstick
you
of
see in the
economic
corner
health.
where it
The
says,
indicators most linked to real GDP growth,
where
therefore,
it says go
attract the
back,
most attention.
like
Second,
up in the upper corner.
ironically, as GDP takes so long to calculate,
So we're going to wait for this to
investors
finish.
fixate on
But
related
once it
statistics
does,
that are released
then if you
sooner.
say go back,
These move
then it will
markets
show that
more
it's
strongly than
completed.
GDP
So for
reports.
whatever reason, when they were
Third,
just reviewing it,
economic
you might not have
forecasts
listened to
are
the whole thing and just said,
foundational
oh,
to
you know, I'm
many
kind of
financial
done here.
models, and therefore investors
And you
need
might
to
have
pay
just either
attention
that or
when the
just
outlook
clicked on
changes.
BMC just to
In
go
some
back to
cases,
everything. So
interpretation
apparently you have
of
to
these
listen to the whole
statistics can
thing,
lead to profitable
then hit
trading
go back.
opportunities.
So
And
while I'm
when
doing the lecture
analyzing the
today,
economy,
what you
take
want to
to
do
heart
is
the advice of
open up a
John
side
Maynard
window and
Keynes.
make sure that
When the
that's
facts
the
change,
cause
I
of the
change my
problem.
mind,
Otherwise,
because
I can have you
econometric
share your
models work
screen and we
beautifully
can
until
figure it
they
out,
don't.
because I'm sure if it's happening to you, I know it was happening to someone else. Steven, was it you that it was happening to? Or was it Jerry? Was it you?
It was
I
me.
can't remember. Yeah. So, right. So, was that the solution? That was the solution, right?
Honestly, I think my iPad just wasn't. I don't know. It's like when I use my iPad, it doesn't do it, but when I use my Mac, it lets me go through, click it, and then it's
Oh.
complete. So
Yeah,
I
because I
stopped
was
using
wondering,
my iPad.
because I was saying go to the lower right corner. When I was looking at this on my iPad, it doesn't look the same. I think you're right. So Bernice, maybe one of the solutions would be is that log into a computer just to go to that last, just click on each module. It'll just take you to the last subpart of it right away. And I think on a computer it will definitely show you. I think it says something like, Jerry, doesn't it say something like finished or go to the next module? I think it says something like that, doesn't it? I think.
It looks the same. It just I don't know. My iPad. Every time I use my iPad, it just didn't complete for some reason. I don't know why.
Okay.
But when I used my computer, it did it perfectly fine.
So even on this, if I just said no next module, I think if I click on this, or it won't even let me. So it should, so Bernice, why don't you just try doing it while I'm starting class here and you can kind of see if it's gonna work.
Okay.
Yep. So I'm just got distracted with other things here. But now that most things are wrapped up for me, I can now finish this up and be done with this. And you should as well. Because again, I can kind of see where everyone is at. So don't think I can't see you. I know where you are. Okay. Let's, the markets aren't really making any sense to me right now. But Jerry, I actually was thinking of you because Jerry, you were the one that did a little bit of cryptocurrency investing, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you hear the big news about how the person that was like running that underground drug thing on the internet, like what was it called, like Silk, like
Silk Road?
River Silk, or what was it?
Silk Road.
Yeah, Silk Road. So the person that was running it got arrested, right? But before he got arrested, I see what you did there, Pierce. Before he got arrested, I guess he got like hacked and someone stole all of his access keys for all of his Bitcoin, which at the time was worth like $345,000. But this was like in 2015 or 2014 or something long ago. Today, it's worth $1 billion. And this week, the owner of that $1 billion in Bitcoin started cashing it out. And I thought of you, Jerry. I don't know what the consequences of that would be, but if we look at this here, yeah. So this was in Bloomberg. So the Justice Department is going to now take the $1 billion in Bitcoin. So I guess the government would be the owner of $1 billion in Bitcoin.
Yeah, they did that before, and then they auctioned it off.
See, I mean, you might know as much as I know about this. If not, you perhaps know more. But the idea that makes Bitcoin attractive to some is the idea that it is fixed in supply, right? At some point, hey, what the hell are you doing, Pierce? Get out of there. I'm sure as a kid you climbed on your kid furniture and caused your parents consternation, but hey, if mommy returns and you are missing an arm, I will get yelled at, I assure you. Sorry, gang. Here, look at this book. This book's got eyes. Look. There you go. Right, Jerry, though, the idea is that it's fixed in size, right? The equation at some point stops generating new coins, right?
Yeah.
So, and do we know when it's supposed to run out or not really? Like, what's the year that it's?
I don't know. I'm pretty sure it's like 100 plus years away though.
No, okay, so we'll be dead, is what you're saying.
Yeah, we'll be dead.
So if in this article, which Chance could talk about if we force people to do articles here, and so everyone's saying, like in this article, everyone is saying that people are super excited about cryptocurrencies right now because if you look at the election and you see all the like craziness going on there, and you even see the Federal Reserve dramatically expanding its money supply, right, which then gives everyone these kind of inflationary fears, that everyone's saying this is like the time when Bitcoin's going to be the most valuable. So if anything, this is like the perfect time for the government to seize, in this case, 69,370 Bitcoins. And I think a Bitcoin right now is what, $3,000, right? Or something? No, $15,000. Fuck. Yeah, should get paid in Bitcoin. That's sad. My salary would be so low if I was paid in Bitcoin. I'd be paid like a few Bitcoins a year. Yeah, that would suck. Okay. Sorry, we're gonna add one more person. Okay. Okay, so let's start with the lecture here. You gotta be kidding me. Someone just signed in now. Making sure I didn't miss nothing. Okay. Okay, so we actually only have, it's kind of sad, we actually only have a few weeks left of class. We also are definitely going to finish all the material we have to do though as well, so that makes me, as my son is indicating to me, pretty happy that we are completing everything on time as we should. So what we want to do here this week is we want to talk about economic growth so that then we kind of finish things up by talking about fiscal policy and monetary policy, and then just kind of wrap things up in general. So when you see this topic is pretty important. It's spread out over 2 chapters in the textbook, but the reason why it's so important is because this is among the first reasons why many economists became economists. You know what? Quite honestly, no one's ever asked me why I became an economist. But most people become economists, I don't know, because they feel like this do-goodedness of like wanting countries to grow. Is anyone curious of why I became an economist? Or no? Maybe. You do? Who is it?
Yeah,
Who
I
is
want to
this?
know.
Okay, so I still remember, like when I was a kid, the first moment that I knew that I wanted to be an economist was, let me show you this here. Okay. Can everyone see that I'm opening up YouTube? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So, if I just pick any one of these. Oh wait, no, it's even before this. Sorry. So I remember.
Now that we've helped people customize and save with Liberty Mutual, we
Not
can finally
that.
do some beach reading.
This is worth it, my friends. Just wait. There we go. So, okay, I'm guessing it's gonna get past this. Oh, jeez. Okay, we're waiting for this here. You're kidding me.
This
Okay, just
is
wait, okay.
PBS.
So these kinds of things. So do you guys kind of remember, for any of you who watched Mr. Rogers, like the way that they would open is something along the lines of this here. I'm just gonna,
This and other public
like
television
this.
stations and the Sears Roebuck Foundation.
So they would always do that same kind of thing. They would just, the show would start and they would just show this, like, first, this blue screen, and still, you know, still what is used here. I'm sorry, but I think they'll show it here.
The people who gave the money to make Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood are the people of this and other public television stations and the Sears Roebuck Foundation.
So there was this idea, like when I was a kid, like even as a kid growing up, I noticed that there was this difference between that kind of show that I would watch, where there were no commercials, and all they would do is show that opening scene of saying, you know, funding for this program was brought to you by the Sears Roebuck Foundation and viewers like you. Thank you, right? So that kind of scene, as opposed to a very popular cartoon when I was growing up would have been Masters of the Universe, right? So cartoons were only on Saturday mornings back in my day. But the idea was that you would watch them and you'd get, like, they'd do the opening scene, then there'd be 2 minutes of commercials. Then you'd get 5 or 10 minutes of show, then you get another 2 minutes or 3 minutes of commercials. And I found it so amazing that the exact same program could be aired and presumably paid for, but in two very different ways, right? So this idea that in the one, it's kind of like a public good, right, where people donate some money and the show is put on, as opposed to a private good that people pay for and it's delivered. And I found that so interesting that you could use two different ways to pay for the same thing and still you get that end product. And I found it amazing that there was no one right way to pay for something. So much so that when I did my dissertation, my graduate, my doctoral dissertation was on exactly that topic of how do you pay for not necessarily Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, but what an economist would call a quasi-public good. I don't know. That was my how I became an economist. And then you get this scene here. Goes to Congress. Well, it actually still showed up here. When I show this, you guys can't hear it though, is that right? You just see the screen, isn't that right?
I can hear it sometimes. It's
Okay, let's see here. If I try it really on. So I'll start to talk over a little bit of this, but there's this famous scene. Yes, Pierce, it's Apple. So this guy, sorry that I'm like interrupting you here, but let me set you up the story here. Mr. Rogers is just starting his career in the late 60s, and so is public television. Public television is just starting. But unfortunately, it's getting most of its money from the government, but the government's got like no money for this, right? Because they're like shooting up people in Vietnam, they're like shooting someone off to the moon, they're like giving out like food stamps and welfare and all these other demands on the public budget, such that Richard Nixon comes into office and says, screw it, public television, Mr. Rogers, you get nothing. So Mr. Rogers then goes to Congress to testify and say why his show should have money. And so he starts talking here. And the person he has to testify in front of is this really mean old man. This guy here, Pastore, Senator Pastore. He's from Rhode Island, but he's like a really mean old guy. I'll show it right now if people can hear it, but I just don't know if people can hear it. Can people? Wait, I think maybe I can enhance people hearing this. Let me do this. Pierce, what the hell are you doing? Is that bad, class? Is that bad to say hell in front of your kid? I don't think so, right? I don't think that's like a swear word. I don't think. Someone's going to tell me it is, but Steven would say it's not. Steven would tell me that he grew up to be a great kid, and his parents told him hell all the time. Then I would say, that's crazy, Steven. This might actually be better because you might actually hear this. Maybe. All right, maybe this one. Can you guys hear it all right? Yes? No? Not really? Okay. Well, it doesn't. You can watch it on your own. I'll send the link to everyone here. But basically, Mr. Rogers has to talk to this mean old guy, and he has to testify in front of this mean old guy. And the mean old guy asks him a whole bunch of hard questions. And Mr. Rogers, who's looking pretty young here, says like all these like nice things about why it's so important that the government and the Sears Roebuck Foundation gives money to his little dumpy show. That the senator, even though he's like a mean old man, he becomes like convinced that the show is actually a good thing, and he gives Mr. Rogers $20 million, and it saves PBS. So I don't know, I feel like that kind of stuff. That's how I became an economist. Trying to answer that question. After spending my entire dissertation on it, though, I'll tell you, I got so sick of that topic. I haven't done research on it since then, so that's anything. I can't believe no one's ever asked me that before. That is the reason why I became an economist. It's an unusual reason. The reason why most people become economists is they're interested in exactly this topic of economic growth. In fact, it's the reason why Adam Smith wrote his first book, Wealth of Nations. Why is it that some countries are rich and other countries are poor? The answer to that question is, of course, complicated, but is, I guess, what's going to be our focus here this week. If you had to press me and you had to tell me in 15 seconds and you just said, Scheiding, why are some countries rich and why are some countries poor? I would say that it's three things. One, having a well-developed capital market. Two, having a stable economic and political system. And three, having enough capital generated internally. Those are the three things. If you've got those three things, you've got an economy that's going to grow. A a stable economic and political environment, a well entrenched capital market that's functioning well, and enough capital that's generated internally. If you've got those three things, your country will grow. And we can think of countries that don't grow as lacking those things. So one example would be is, why is sub-Saharan Africa, why are so many of the countries so poor? And the reason why so many of those countries are poor is because they actually lack all three of those things in some cases. They lack capital markets. They lack a stable economic and political system. Pierce, you're going to fall. Pierce, you're going to fall. Pierce, get down. If we look at a country like Cameroon, I'm just going to pick Cameroon as an example. Cameroon's actually has a lot of, it doesn't have a civil war, but they have civil war tendencies in that country. They do not have a good capital market, and what capital they do have, they'll get all from China, and the only reason why they get it from China is because they don't recognize Taiwan. And that's like a big problem for most of sub-Saharan Africa. They've got capital for investment, but the only reason they get it is because they tell China that they're not going to recognize Taiwan. I mean, dude, like, that's a pretty shitty way to go into this world, because now you're stuck with that around your neck. Same with Latin America too. In Latin America, you've got developing countries that the only way that they are getting capital for future investment is because they don't recognize Taiwan. Now, to explain this a little bit further here, if right now with those three things in mind, that a growing economy has a strong capital market, it has internal sources for that capital, that they're not relying on other countries for their capital, and that they have economic and political stability, everything else then becomes a fixable problem. So one thing we'll see here in the first bullet point is this idea that even if the economy is closed, that the standard of living depends on the savings rate and the population growth rate. The reason why that's the case is because that actually all relates to how much capital I have and how much capital I have per worker, right? This goes back to the second topic, kind of when we were talking about production in the very beginning. If you remember, little k stands for the total capital I have per worker. Well, if my population is growing uncontrollably, and this is staying the same, then little k would fall. So what would you do? What would you do to fix this problem? Think of what countries have done to fix this problem. There's two solutions. How do you fix this problem? That's not rhetorical. I'll wait for an answer. How do you fix the problem of having less capital per worker?
Economic stimulus, or printing, or not printing money. I don't know. Economic stimulus is one. That's all I know.
Well, you could use economic stimulus to try to grow the numerator, right? So instead of having a constant, you could try to grow it, right?
Uh-huh.
So you can use. So we use the tax policy for, like, so as you all now know in the class, I bought a house, and dude, there's like a shit ton of tax credits for doing dumpy things to my house. Like, if I I don't know, grow a fantastic, extraordinary tree on my lawn, I apparently get a property tax credit, right? Like, and a tree is, I guess, capital goods, right? But also, like, if I like put up solar panels, I get a tax credit. If I, any number of home improvements are actually all tax deductible. So we even as an individual, I get incentives to grow my capital stock. What about the L? What's a famous example of a country dealing with L? What did China do? Doesn't do it anymore.
Oh, the one-child policy.
Exactly, the one-child policy. So, China followed exactly slide 3 here. In 1979, Mao said that if we're going to make this economy grow, we need to reduce the population growth rate. So the only way they could do that is that if you lived in the countryside, you could have up to 3 children. But if you lived in the cities or the urban areas, you could have only 1 child. And if you had more than 1 child, you had to pay a pretty significant fine. And what it did is that throughout the 1980s and 1990s and early 2010s, I think the policy was stopped in 2010, 2009 or 2010, is that basically Chinese couples wanted to have boys, right? Because boys were seen as kind of the way to have economic growth rate. And then they had the problem of having too many boys. But also, right, you hear these like on Netflix, there's all these like interesting documentaries if you're interested in this topic, but there's all these interesting documentaries of, really sad stories of either mothers having, abortions to like hide, to not have a child, or having the child, but then having to hide it from the authorities so that the, child doesn't get, so that the child doesn't get, taken away, or that you get these huge fines. There's actually a much better way of doing this. And again, I'm not trying to be weird or creepy in talking about this, so you don't have to listen to me. But a far, far better solution to telling parents only have 1 kid is you could do what Ethiopia did. And Ethiopia is now actually among the strongest growing countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And the reason why they are the strongest growing country is because girls, as early as late elementary school, early middle school, are taught sex education. And they are given access to women's health programs. They're taught safe sex practices. Basically, they can take ownership over the reproductive process, right? In a way that they can be assertive in terms of knowing how to plan for a family, right? Rather than, getting lost in the moment and then all of a sudden you got a kid, which is right. It's not unusual then to see in a developing country that family sizes are often quite large. And the reason why is because you don't have access to family planning, but also you don't have a social network, a safety network. And because you don't have a safety network, the only way that a family can prepare for economic problems is by having lots of children, so that when the parents are old, the children will support them, presumably. Okay, I hope that wasn't too creepy. Okay.
So in China's case, rising population, inflating the population deflated the cost of labor per person.
The capital per worker. It depleted the capital per worker. Go on. Mm-hmm.
No, that's what I was asking. I just wanted clarification.
Yeah, no, exactly right. So the problem was that it's the problem that India, quite frankly, has right now. Mm-hmm. India's got too many people, and they don't have enough capital to provide all of the workers with all of the capital that they need. So the problem is that if if you thought of there being two different growth rates, right? My growth rate of capital, but also my growth rate, let's say, of my population, let's call it lowercase l. If this is far greater than this, right? If my capital stock is not growing that quickly, right? Then my capital per worker
Is lowercase l not really the population, but the labor force?
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
So we're presuming here that when kids grow up, they enter the labor force. We're presuming. So the way that a country like Ethiopia is attacking the problem, and I think in a more humane way, I guess would be a nice way of saying it, is that families, women still get to make the choice of how many kids they're going to have. It's just that they're informed about how many kids to have. I mean, this isn't like time to talk about our misspent youth, but I doubt that for many of us that was the first thing on our minds when we were teenagers. Right, but if you really started it off early and you had early education, right, then if anything, if you use safe practices, then you don't have unintended children and you don't unintentionally grow the size of your population, right? You follow we can call it like a boring pattern here, but we can actually follow a pattern where once the mother and the father are married, or even if it's just a single parent, that the parent has an established work career, then they have a child, they take some time off to have the child, and then the extended family raises the child when the mother and or the father cannot. Now you haven't reduced your productive worker, right? Because the mother is going back to work when she's able to. But also, when that child 18 years later enters the workforce, you've got the number of additional workers, like the flow, the growth rate, isn't so unstable that you can actually still have enough capital being created to support those new entrants to the workplace. And India does not have that. India has a complete, they just don't have enough capital. And the reason why they don't have enough capital is they're quite frankly having too many children. And it's a problem that's not unique to India, but it's not unique to India, but you certainly see it in most developing countries. In developing countries, they have too many children, and it goes the opposite way. So right now in the United States, I guess I'm the only exception to this rule, but not enough people are having kids, or they're having kids too late, and they're not having enough of them. I've done my part now. I mean, I can't do much more. I've contributed enough to overpopulation in the world, but the problem is that the fertility rate among women in the United States is falling. So that's a concern, because now what you're seeing is that my labor stock is falling. And what we know is that both capital and labor are required to produce stuff. So we can't just rely on robots. So this is the problem that Japan has, for instance. This is the problem that France has. It's the problem the United States has. And the only way you can fix this problem, the way that Japan has successfully fixed it, and the way that Canada has successfully fixed it, is through immigration, right? And especially having immigrants from countries that are more reproductive, right? That really helps you grow your economy, as opposed to people that don't have as many children as they should. Oh, this is becoming a really creepy class really fast. What am I telling you?
You're relying on immigrant labor because relying on boosting your own population would be a more expensive form of labor, and also in a longer term.
And in the longer term, what? and in the longer term, those workers that I bring in that I didn't produce myself, right? So instead of raising a child to become an engineer 22 years later, I'm just going to allow an engineer to immigrate from, let's say, India. But now my hope is that that Indian engineer marries someone and has more kids, right? Now I fixed my problem in two different ways, right? I both got my engineer that I needed, and my engineer started having kids that um, my citizens weren't having enough on their own, right? And so really not to generalize here, but we can obviously think of, this is obviously a little bit political at this point, right? But there's something to be said for having a relaxed immigration policy in a country, especially if your traditional population in your country is not replicating fast enough. So really, you've only got one or two, right? And so the U.S. government, as our example here, does do the other thing. I mean, not that I'm doing this to get rich, but I'm having a third child here. Dude, I mean, I guess I'm kind of pumped. I'll get the federal child tax credit, which isn't insignificant. Kids cost more than the federal tax credit I get, but still I'm being slightly incentivized. I would hope that no one would have a child only for that incentive, but it's a nice little added benefit to having a child, I suppose. But it's not that big. So don't any of you think that you need to have a child tomorrow, because it's not that big of a credit. Okay. Just as this last part here, on this slide here, this is slide 4 only. It turns out that if we look at countries that have, why is it good to be an economy that grows? The reason why it's good to be that kind of economy is that, generally speaking, the people in your country are going to be happier and they're going to be healthier, generally speaking. The U.S. is sort of an exception to this because despite our relative richness, we actually have the highest infant mortality among developed countries in the world. But it's not because of our richness that causes that. Does anyone want to harbor a guess of why we have such high infant mortality?
I'm gonna guess more poor people have children than rich people or middle class people, and poor people have less access to proper health care.
Yeah. No, I mean, generally speaking, it's exactly true, right? So one of the things I had to give a lecture this week to a public health graduate seminar over at Manoa. And so these were all master's and PhD students, that are going to get jobs at, Hawaii Department of Health, that kind of thing. And I was talking about exactly this topic. And one of the students in the class, she's probably like 25, 30 years old, right? So she's kind of like an early professional. She's getting her graduate degree so that then she can, move up to a higher job. And so I asked this exact same question I just asked all of you. And she said exactly what you just said, Cody. But, then one of the other students in class said, well, but what we know is that, poor individuals sometimes actually have better access to healthcare because they have Medicaid, access to Medicaid, right, which is the healthcare insurance for the poor. Now, for some of you in this class, Cody, I know you're one of them. You took my contemporary economic issues class, right?
Yeah.
What do you remember? What do you remember as the critique that one could make about Medicaid? Do you remember anything about that? If not, you can just say, remind me again.
Yeah, I'm not confident in anything.
So the problem with Medicaid, for any of you who've ever been on it, my wife's been on it. So, when my wife first immigrated to the United States, she was 6 years old. And so, right, the family didn't even know English. They went on Medicaid right away. But it totally sucks because you have a really difficult time finding a provider. Like, no one wants to offer, like, no doctors want to accept the Medicaid as health insurance because they pay so little reimbursement, right? So you typically get like the old weird creeper doctors, right? Because those are the only ones that like are like retired or they're just weird because those are the only ones that take the Medicaid insurance. So like as an example of that, like my wife just had like something she just had like some sort of like she still had Medicaid up until she was 18, but she like wasn't like really sick, but she had to go to the doctor once, and she ended up getting her appendix taken out. But she didn't even have, so she had an appendectomy, but she actually didn't have appendicitis. For some reason, the like dumpy doctor that took Medicaid just said, "Oh, I think the solution is let's just take out your appendix," when that actually wasn't even the problem at all. Now, again, that's a little bit of an extreme example of Medicaid not being effective. But actually, if you look at the outcomes of like why Medicaid, what participants in that program, what's their critique of it, is exactly what I'm telling you. It's great if you can find doctors that take it, but it totally sucks if you can't because it can be just as bad as not having any insurance at all. Because especially if you're on the neighbor islands, it like totally sucks because most of your providers are not going to be on the islands. Yeah.
So the performance of Medicaid can be dependent on where you live.
Yes, that first part. Yes, absolutely. So it's partly dependent on where you live. So we obviously know that in rural areas, they don't have enough providers, and let's say they have access to, let's say one of the local rural hospitals does take the Medicaid, it's probably going to have incredibly poor outcomes. Meaning they'll take Medicaid, but let's say they're really bad at like the doctors are bad at washing their hands, or I'm using a little bit of an extreme scenario there, right? But usually they don't either have the equipment or the training or the resources in general to really care well for a person, as opposed to, so for instance, here in Honolulu, so my mother-in-law, my wife's mother, is still on Medicaid, but she goes to Kaiser. And so because she lives in Honolulu, right, she has access to all of the Kaiser doctors. Kaiser takes the Medicaid. So she has, in her case, she has far better coverage being a Medicaid patient here as opposed to someone who lives in Montana, let's say, in the middle of Montana, that doesn't have access to the same like hospital system or doctors. And that kind of sucks. I mean, it's a national program, partly paid for by the states. But if we want, and this was what I had said to the public health class, was it's the reason why you should care about this topic is that it's not that you should be demanding, that our politicians or whoever, that they need to pay for more Medicaid, right? It's just that they need to spend the money more effectively, right? They either need to do it like Medicare, because in Medicare, most doctors take Medicare. That's health care for old people. But most doctors do not take Medicaid. Why is that? Why do most doctors take Medicare, but most doctors do not take Medicaid? Why do most doctors not take Medicaid, but they do take Medicare?
You don't need to be poor to be on Medicare, and
Correct.
assume that Medicare doesn't cover the complete bill, you are, I don't know, more creditworthy to be able to pay the rest of the bill.
That's actually part of it. Yeah, that can be an absolutely part of it. So the way that Medicare works is that Medicare recipients pay 20% of the cost, right? So just kind of like how all of us have cost sharing with our health insurance. It's true. Medicare individuals do pay 20%. Medicaid patients typically pay nothing. But also the other part of it is, again, what's the reimbursement rate, right? The reimbursement rate's driving most of this. So, right, so I have HMSA, employer coverage, and, you know, my wife we're having a baby. So, you know, my wife goes to a pretty well-known OBGYN here on the islands, but and she seems like a very nice woman, very nice old woman. But the only reason why, just wait, my wife just came home here. Okay, good. Okay. The only reason why got taken on was that the reimbursement rate was significantly higher, right? And the question specifically asked was, you know, what kind of coverage, you know, what kind of coverage do you have? And you had to reveal that you had a PPO plan, right? So by revealing that, you're already saying that you know, the doctor's going to be able to get paid enough. And I don't know, it seems kind of wrong, but at the same time, I guess you can't deny that there's market forces at work even in healthcare. Okay. Let's see here. I got off of this topic, but it is related to this. To this issue that why would growth matter? Because, well, when you have more growth, you can also pay for more health insurance. You can pay for, before the 1960s, we didn't even have Medicare and Medicaid. So as bad as I'm complaining about them, we didn't even have them before. So back in it started to be outlined in the 1970s and into the 1980s. The question became one of, why is it that, what is it that we could do to make a country grow quite a bit? So this is 1970s, 1980s. And the person who really thinks about this quite a bit was Robert Solow. So Robert Solow starts to then talk about what are the government policies that can encourage economic growth, what are the shocks to the economic system as determined by government policies that could help encourage economic growth, and how would you want to optimally design your economy to grow at a sustainable rate? Now that's important too, right? So we're really talking about here, not only how do you grow an economy, but how do you grow an economy in a sustainable way so that it's growing over the long term? Okay, so what if instead of now in the Solow growth model, what we now want to no longer do is we want to now no longer have capital being fixed. Now that's important because what that means is that capital needs to grow fast enough to overcome two things. It needs to overcome depreciation, and it needs to overcome the fact that my population is growing. So this is my lowercase delta, or lowercase d in Greek, standing for depreciation. Depreciation is capital wearing itself out. So just think of like your car, right? A car depreciates because it gets used over time, right? And it really depreciates a lot in that first year because your car is no longer new, right? Whereas it doesn't depreciate a lot in year 15 because your car was already pretty crappy by that point. The second aspect of the Solow growth model is that now my labor force can grow, So now we need to make sure it's growing sustainably. And to keep this a little simple here, we're just going to not imagine there being a government for right now. So with that said, here's my, going back to what we saw in chapter 3, here's my production function. So again, I'm starting out with a Cobb-Douglas production function that's saying here that output is a function of capital stock and labor stock, how many workers I have and how much capital they have. And more specifically, I'm going to look at my output per worker, little y, and I'm going to look at my capital per worker, lowercase k. Again, don't worry about the math. I'm not going to test you on that, but just understand the theory I'm telling you here at this point. Is everyone good so far? Yes. I'm going to assume it's a yes. We're going. Good? Not good?
Good, we're good.
Good. Okay, I'm going to keep going here. Okay, so now you see with my capital per worker, it's now my marginal productivity of capital is increasing at a decreasing rate. So I have diminishing marginal productivity of capital. That MPK stands for marginal productivity of capital. And what we're saying here is that my productivity of capital is going to be equal to what's my output when I have one more unit of capital. How much does my output grow by when I have one more unit of capital per worker? We're basically saying in the very beginning, workers become very productive by having additional capital. And that at some point, you've got too much capital. Now, where we go from this, where we go from here is we then need to understand what's determining the amount of consumption per worker and their income per worker. And all of that's determined by the output. So my consumption per worker is determined by my output per worker. Okay. So if we look at this from, I'm just getting out of this here just to see, to make sure I'm not missing anything too important here. Okay. Sorry. So my consumption per worker is determined by my output worker. To the extent that I increase this, it's going to lead to increases in this. So it's good to have more stuff being produced. The only way I'm going to get that additional consumption per worker, and here's the kind of the trade-off, is that the only way I can get more consumption per worker is by having more capital per worker. But the only way I can get more capital per worker is by having more savings. But if I have more savings, then I get less consumption. So I'll repeat that. If I want to increase my consumption per worker, then I need to increase my total income. The only way I can increase my total income is by increasing my capital per worker. But the only way I can increase my capital per worker is by increasing my savings rate. But when I increase the savings rate, it reduces my consumption. fuck, right? Like, how can I have that happening? Does anyone know what the possible solution to this is? Or want to harbor a guess of what this possible solution is?
You lower interest rates.
If I lower interest rates, that's going to reduce savings and that's going to increase consumption.
Wait,
But if I lower savings, then my capital is going to fall. And if my capital is falling, then my income falls and my consumption falls. So the only way you can do this, think about what was so difficult for you to learn as a child. What was a difficult lesson for you to learn as a child? There's probably a lot of things that were difficult for all y'all as a child. Generally, a hard thing to teach a child is how to forestall or delay current consumption so that you can save more for the future. With the idea that if you save more now, you can actually consume more in the future, right? So I'm 43 years old, right? I've never owned a house. I've actually never owned a new car. But I'm now able to buy a new house with the idea that for a very long time, I didn't engage in that kind of consumption, right? I didn't buy a new car. I didn't, buy new fancy clothes. If any of you see me, you say I don't wear fancy clothes. So there's a whole bunch of things I didn't do in terms of consumption so that I could save, so that then eventually I could buy a new house. Well, a new to me house, which in some sense represents me being able to consume more in the future, right? Which is mine now. So, what we need to do here is that the savings per worker then would equal my income per worker minus my consumption per worker. So basically, we're presuming here that there's only two things you can do with your money: save it and consume it. And if I just took my total income and I subtracted what I consumed, I'd be left with lowercase s. And that also, C is also equal to 1 minus s. So what's happening here is that they're substituting that. They're substituting for C 1 minus s. And the reason why they're doing that is that then my savings is equal to my portion of savings times my total income, Y. And if we presume that I equals S, and I start to rearrange terms, you don't need to worry about it too much here, but I'm left with this. Now, this is an important function, this last part of slide 11, because basically what it says is that my savings rate in the country is determined by my level of investment in the country. And so to the extent that people in my country save more, they'll be able to invest more, which is one of, again, the original three things I said about what a country needs to do to be able to grow, is that the people need to be saving their own money. They can't be relying on capital from others. Because if they do that, the problem with sub-Saharan Africa, right, is that if they're relying on capital that comes from China by not recognizing Taiwan, the problem then is that they got all of the capital, yet they've also got high current consumption. That causes a problem because now my country's productive forces are, making consumption goods like, I don't know, avocado toast instead of machinery for the factory. And that's just not good for the country in terms of its productive capabilities. If none of you notice, I left my downstairs where my child is yelling to go upstairs to where the neighborhood kids are now all yelling. I live in faculty housing. We do not follow the solo growth model. We are all replicating far too much and far too quickly. I don't know if it's just that faculty housing is boring or what's going on, but we're all having too many children. So if we look at this, we want to graph this out. Let's say that my savings rate is equal to 20% of my total output. Then it all equals my investment. That is right there. Which would then mean that this is 0.8 F of K. F of K meaning, again, my output. This is my 0.2 F of K. Such that the two add up to equaling F of K. Right, 0.8 plus 0.2 equals 1. Now, where we go with this is that then there's some depreciation. This is a lowercase d, Greek term delta for depreciation. So my capital stock is wearing out. Let's say it's wearing out at a constant rate. Let's say it's wearing out at 0.05 times K. Now, basically what that means then is that I need to save 5% of my output just to replace worn out capital. Then I'm also going to have more capital because my labor stock is growing. So what that means here, I'm just going to jump to this picture here, is that one thing you can see that goes on here, and I'll scroll back to this here. But one thing that goes on here then is that here's my savings rate, SF of K. Here's my depreciation. And that right there is my steady state, meaning no change in capital at that point. The reason why there's no change in capital at that point is because my savings rate exactly equals my depreciation. If I were instead over here, depreciation would exceed savings. I'm sorry, other way around, sorry. My savings exceeds my depreciation. So what that means is that my capital is going to grow, because let's say I'm saving 20%, but my capital is only depreciating by 0.05. So I've got a 0.15 difference, which means my capital is going to grow because I'm saving more than it's wearing out, which is why we move to the right, because my savings rate steadily, the amount is going to steadily go up. As opposed to over here, where my depreciation exceeds my savings. .05 being, let's say, greater than 0.02, which is my savings. So now my capital falls in size. So it's kind of like equilibrium here. And that's exactly what we see here. That the definition of our steady state is such that the change in capital is 0. And we call it the steady state capital stock because basically the amount of annual investment that's occurring is just enough to counteract or replace the depreciation. And I'm not going to repeat myself, but you would see that in these slides right here about how we move back to the steady state. This is totally going to save me some time, but you can see this here. I'll just further highlight that so that you see that. And I'm not going to make you, I'm going to cross this out because you do not need to do this. So if you're keeping track at home, you do not need to concern yourself with slide 26. We'll just say that's 26. You don't need to worry about that. I'm not going to force you to do that. Okay. It's 6:21 here. I'm on slide 29. Let's take a break for 9 minutes. Let's pick this back up at 6:30, and then I'm going to start with this example here. In the meantime, Bernice, did you get a chance to look at the Bloomberg thing?
Yeah, I actually figured it out. I didn't realize that there was a next button in the video.
Okay. On that very last one, right? Like in the last one for a module?
Yeah.
Okay, so just as a tip for everyone, if you're on Bloomberg and you're like finishing a module, but it's not showing like that you actually completed it, it's because when you were on the last video for that module, you didn't click next. And I think, right, it's on the lower right-hand side, is that right? Or is it the upper right-hand
Lower
side?
right.
Yeah, lower right. So on the lower right side, if you're on a computer, or even maybe on a particular kind of iPad, you would see it. But you have to click that when you're on the last video, because by clicking that, that then tells the Bloomberg system you then actually completed it. So I'm kind of hoping too, for some of you who show absolutely no progress on any of the modules, I'm actually kind of hoping you actually have made progress, that you just have the Bernice problem of not actually having done the very last step. Sorry, Bernice, I'll just make it your problem. But Jerry did it too, dude. So it's not just you. It's Jerry's fault. It's Jerry's fault. Okay, let's take a break for 10 minutes. So let's just resume at 6:33. I'm gonna pick it up with this slide, slide 29. Okay, I am back here. Okay. Okay, let's go back to sharing my screen. Okay, let's go back to this. Okay, so one of the questions that you'll have in the homework is, how do you solve for what the steady state is going to be? So let's just create a very simple example here. Let's say that the savings rate is 30%. Let's say that the depreciation rate is 10%, and that my production function looks like this: y equals k to the 1/2. And we basically want to solve for this. So what we know is true is that when it's in the steady state, the capital should not be growing at all. Delta k equals 0. And then another way of saying this would be that the delta k, that there's this special level of capital, k star, where we reach this steady state. And that it must be such that 0.3 times k to the 1/2. Remember that k to the 1/2 is the same as the square root of k, because right, that's what to the 1/2 power looks like, is square root. So if it's 0.3, which is this part, f of k is k to the 1/2, which is that part, equals my depreciation times k. My depreciation equals 0.1 and k is k. And so now I can cross multiply, or sorry, divide and solve for k. So if I divide each side by 0.1, then 0.3 divided by 0.1 is 3. And if I divide square root of k, square root of k, that's where I get equals k over square root of k. K to the first over k to the 1/2 equals k to the 1/2, because when you divide powers, you subtract them. So this is basically the essence of saying 1 minus 1/2 equals 1/2 k, which is the same as saying square root of k. Sorry, I cannot fit it. So 3 equals square root of k. So now the question is what does k being square rooted have to equal for it to be 3? That's 9, because right, the square root of 9 is 3. Now, once I know that k is equal to 9, now this totally becomes solvable, because now I just have to plug things in. And I'd be able to find my consumption. Now, this is a little bit of an extreme example. You don't have to worry as much as you would have in other semesters of this class, because in other semesters of this class, the exam had problems like this. I'm not forcing you to do this in the exam. As you know, you have multiple choice. And I was intentional. Most of my multiple choice questions can be looked up on the internet. I made sure that they could be, that you'd find some answers to some of them. So hopefully most of you know that, and you're kind of doing your Google searches and whatnot, and also looking up things in the book. I tried to be pretty boring and stick pretty close to things. It's really on the short answers where I start to deviate a little bit, which is probably why some of you were grumpier on the short answer questions. Now, the way that this all becomes interesting is now I can start to talk about public policies and how do different public policies change the savings rate. Okay, so let's just make sure here. Okay. So if I increase the savings rate, what we see is that the savings function increases. But now look at what happens to my steady state. My steady state grows as well. So now the amount of capital required is now larger to be at the steady state. Basically, this economy is maturing. This is a good thing, right? Because what this also means is that my output per worker, Y, is increasing. And also C would be increasing. And this goes back to the question I asked. Here. So here was the question on slide 10. Why does this not happen? Why is it actually a good thing that, why is it actually a good thing to have more savings? Because as we see here, well, even as we see here, by saving more, the steady state moves to the right. And as it moves to the right, my output per worker also increases. And that's what's described here on slide 32. Higher savings leads to a higher steady state. And a higher steady state leads to higher output per worker. That's what the solar growth model tells us. It tells us if I'm a country that's trying to grow, I need to actually incentivize people to save more rather than consume more. And that's very difficult to convince a leader to do that, but it's actually to their benefit. And that's exactly what China followed. China followed the solar growth model in 1979, and they grew their economy to the economic power that it is today. So then you get to this idea of there's this idea of the golden rule. So what we know now is that if different levels of savings lead to different steady states, is there such a thing as the best steady state? In other words, is there a steady state where the consumption is the highest? Like, what would that be? That's what this slide's basically asking. Well, if we want to look at this graphically, here's what we know is true. Is that any steady state exists somewhere on this depreciation line. Because, as we can even see back here, all the steady states are for various different levels of savings, right? So all of the steady states exist somewhere along this depreciation line, somewhere. So if we take that same logic, then the difference between S of k and f of k is equal to consumption. So now all I'm trying to do here is maximize consumption, maximize the difference. So there's one particular steady state that's occurring right here. There's a level of savings that's a steady state because it's intersecting with the depreciation rate. So I'm saving just as much as it's depreciating. But now the difference between what's being saved and what's being earned is the largest, which means I'm getting the most consumption. And that's that most consumption point, the point where that gap is the largest, where I'm at the golden rule of capital stock, or the golden level. It would also be where the slope of the two functions are equal to each other. This is a pretty important equation. It's where my marginal productivity of capital is equal to my depreciation. The two lines are parallel to each other, as we see right here. These two lines are parallel, meaning they have the same slope. This one having the slope of MPK, this one having the slope of the depreciation. and they're equal to each other. When they are equal to each other, consumption is maximized. Now, the thing about the golden rule is that as fantastic as it is, no economy would naturally go to that point on its own. All that an economy is going to do is it's going to naturally go to some steady state, not necessarily to the golden rule level, the golden level steady state. And what that means is that you then need policymakers to try to adjust the savings rate to meet that. And the reason why you can see that is you can imagine that if I'm saving too much or my level of capital stock is too high, then actually my long-term consumption is lower. And sorry, just finishing typing this here. Is that if the steady state is greater than my golden steady state, then consumption's too high. If my consumption's too high, then my savings falls. And if my savings falls, then my level of investment falls. So my consumption is too high, my investment falls, and as a result, my output is lower. This steady state is bad. How do I, as a policymaker, basically fix this? You know, you can go the opposite way. We can have, you know, in some sense, we can have too little capital. We can have a problem where my level of investment, where people save too much. And if people save too much, then my consumption falls. But eventually, people actually do get to enjoy more stuff. But you do have that initial fall. There's got to be something where I can enjoy more consumption at all points in time. And that would be by making these adjustments to the capital levels. This is the part I already talked about here, about the population growth, because this is the other part of this. So the other part of this is that if your economy is growing too quickly, I can try to change it by either having more family planning going on, or alternatively by having immigration or emigration. And you know, again, it can be controversial, but it doesn't mean it's not the right thing to talk about. Canada has actually done a pretty good job of immigration, of getting immigrants into the country, not just like engineers, but even like people who like weld or drive a tow truck or things like that. And so they've done that to replace the fact that they have so few people and that those people aren't having enough kids. What this means now is that my capital stock is both depreciating and it's being spread thinner. It's being spread thinner because my population is growing in size, using up just capital. So now this means I need to save enough money to replace worn out capital and to spread the capital over more workers. Which now means that if I want to understand the change in capital stock, I have to look at how much is being saved minus what's being worn out. and spread across more workers. And if I subtract those two and it equals 0, that would be my new way of understanding my steady state. In other words, I could be like right here, and here I am saving more. So as I save more, I grow more in capital per worker. Here, the problem is the opposite. And I'm not saving enough. And so now my capital is decreasing in size. Again, getting us to a steady state. So the solo growth model means, again, that as policymakers, we need to be both concerned with savings policy and people replicating each other. And if you think about US tax policy, it exactly addresses these two things, right? There are incentives for dividend investments, right? Because they're actually taxed at a lesser rate. There are incentives for engaging in capital investment by starting your own business, because some of those expenses are tax deductible. And as I said, there are certain tax incentives for having children. But there is such a thing as you're having too high of a population growth rate. See what happens here? So in this case here, let's say that I'm still saving the same amount of money, but now I'm having too many kids in my country. Now the steady state level is going to be lower, which means that my output's going to be lower, which means that my consumption is going to be lower. How you stop people from having kids? Dude, I don't know. COVID, I mean, what were we all doing? Sitting at home, right? I don't know what you do then. Okay. Let me add to this here. So what this does then for, if you remember that one equation that I circled previously about it being important, all that we do is we can basically complicate it a little bit further. And by now saying that the population growth rate N should basically equal the marginal productivity of capital minus the depreciation rate. So this becomes our new kind of important rule for understanding change in the economy. Now, I want to make sure I do here before we end for today. So those are the slides themselves, and I just want to go into Bloomberg here. And Ethiopia, let's look at a bond here that's coming due. We can look at this one that's coming due here. It's 2024. Yeah, I mean, look at how it's trading. That's trading as basically pretty high quality bond. And that's fantastic. Look at that for sub-Saharan Africa. It's not exactly investment grade, but it's just below investment grade quality. Ethiopia, that's pretty fantastic. If you forced me to buy a bond in this kind of way, I would do it here, as opposed to, I have no idea what this one's going to look like here, but let's just see. Cameroon. just a little bit weaker. I can see this in the investment grade, but I can also just see it in the pricing, right? In terms of pricing, in terms of my yield, it's not junk quality, but it's certainly riskier quality, as opposed to Ivory Coast. Just also just as bad here, right? So basically the problem, right, that the Ivory Coast is facing here is that they're not generating enough capital on their own. They have to borrow from others. Now they've lost control basically of their capital markets. I'm not saying that the Ivory Coast is never going to be able to grow on its own, but it's going to have a problem if it has to rely on others. And those others that it's relying on are, if you're the Ivory Coast, it's France, because you're a former colony of France. And so everything you owe to France. Let's see here. They issued this in. Oh, it's actually in dollars, actually, euro dollars. Interesting. Okay. That's really it for this topic. So this is a combined chapter 7 and 8 from the book. So this is basically covering all of economic growth. Hopefully the multiple choice question should be a little bit straightforward. There shouldn't be any complicated problems you have to solve. But basically, that's it. I mean, for some of you, this might be the reason why you really like economics, is exactly this kind of topic of how do you encourage economies to grow. But again, for me, it was never really the thing, but everyone's their own. Okay, so we're actually done early here. I've got nothing more to say, but I'll log off last. The biggest thing would be this week would be the week when you're going to get the nasty email from me, unless you send me an email first telling me why you're not done yet with your Bloomberg, at least the first 4 modules. You'll at least need to tell me why you're not done yet. Either you reach out to me, which is easier, or I'll have to reach out to you, which is a little bit harder. Well, it's not harder. It's just, it is what it is. Okay, I'm going to log off last. So you can ask me any questions if you want. Otherwise, I'm just going to log off last. Okay, bye, everyone. I will see you next week when perhaps we have a president.
I have a random question.
Sure.
Do you usually teach stats during the summer?
I do, usually. Yeah,
no, because I want to take that.
Yeah, so it's actually the only time I teach stats is in the summer. So this would be, I would be teaching it probably in session 1. If I don't teach it this summer, like, because I know Manoa really wants me to teach in their graduate program this summer. If I become overextended and I can't teach it this summer, because they only limit how many classes we can teach in the summer, then I will definitely be teaching it in the fall as an online class. So if you don't see me in the summer, then it would be in the fall, and I would probably do either online or I would do the 1 evening a week thing.
Okay.
Do you have a preference?
No, I just well, maybe actually.
What would your preference be?
Probably summer, just because I want to keep in mind, like, I have to do the capstone.
Mm-hmm.
So if I could get that done, because I think it's like one of my core requirements for my poli-sci class, if I can get that done early before like next year when I am a senior, then I can focus on the capstone.
So one other way we could do it too, right, Chance, so that to kind of maximize your chances of success. The other way we could do it is that I did record my lectures from even this last summer when I taught it. And again, this is one of the rare social science classes I teach, as I teach stats. I did record my lectures. So what you could always do too is that if you didn't like who was teaching it, for instance, or you just didn't want to have that different kind of experience, you could just do it with me as independent study, which doesn't, it still count as the course. It would still be listed in your transcript as the course. It would just be, I would create, for you all of the lectures, put them in the course, and then you would kind of like watch the lectures and work through the material. So that would be the alternative way of doing it too. But if I didn't do it this, though, the only caution I would have here is that if for some reason it wasn't done in the summer, it would definitely be in the fall if it didn't happen in the summer.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to like plan out my 2
it's
years.
good. No, it's good. It's good that you do it now, because you could also take it concurrently too. So you could do it in the fall as well as doing other courses too.
Yeah.
Because plus, remember too, in the summer you're paying per credit you take, as opposed to during the semester when you can take as much as you want.
Yeah, I mean, I still am gonna get like a whole bunch of quote unquote free courses because I'm doing like 7 classes.
Yeah, that's true.
Either way,
Yeah.
I gotta pay the same amount.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, yeah, I would tell you for planning purposes, if I don't teach it in the summer, I'm definitely teaching it in the fall. And I probably will try to teach it. I probably will try to teach it online first, and if I don't teach it online, then I'll do it the one night a week thing.
Yeah, because I tried to look for Stats 210 from all the other UH campuses, and it's basically just West Oahu.
Yeah, well, what you would there's an alternative way you would do it. So here's the way you would do it: is you would find any other stats course. You could even find it at Leeward, and then what the advisors do is that they know what the equivalent is at Leeward, and then they just convert it. So it might not be exactly 210, right? It might be like 213 at Kapiolani or 223 at Leeward or something like that. You just have to find something closely equivalent, because then what they do is that you tell the advisor, I want to take this and have it count for graduation. Then the advisor emails the instructor that typically teaches it and says, hey, this student wants to take this class. Is this class a lot like the class you teach? And then the faculty member says yes or no. Then if they say yes, then the advisor counts it as the equivalent.
Okay.
But remember, there's an advantage to doing that though too, because you're transferring it, you're just transferring the credit. You're not transferring the grade. So all you have to do is get a passing grade to have it come over, as opposed to the grade being actually recorded as A, B, C, whatever.
I didn't think about that. That's a great point.
Yeah, so I mean, that's just another thing to consider.
Interesting. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yep, not a problem. Yep, let me know. Okay.
I will. Thank you.
Okay, sounds good. Yep.
Okay. And then the Bloomberg thing is due today? Is that what you're saying?
You should try to get it done. It's not necessarily due today, but you should try to get it done. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I just want to aim for like a specific time, I guess. Make it easier on you.
You don't have to worry about that. I would say try to get it done by the end of the weekend. That would be my goal. Monday is when I'm gonna start emailing people.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yep, not a problem.
I was about to ask about Bloomberg, but Chance just asked, and I was like, okay, that answers my question.
Yeah. So exactly, yeah.
I'm gonna work on that right now.
Yeah, and I'm gonna too, because I actually have to still finish up the 4th module as well. So here's what I learned though, just as a good tip. You know how we always were worrying about what scores we got? Now yes. Bloomberg doesn't care what score you get. No matter what, you always pass. So all you have to do, even if you get 0%, it's just your ego that's been hurt. So, yeah. So it's not that bad.
Good to know.
Yeah. So the other thing about the fees thing, remember that? Like the fees discussion?
Yes.
Yes. So I have gotten back my chair. So I asked a whole bunch of different people in like one email, and my the advisor said it's up to the vice chancellor's office. I asked my chair, and my chair said, well, if you want to change it, you can change it. You have my support. And now I've heard nothing. And it's now been a week. So I'm going to now email again the vice chancellor's office to push it forward again. So no one has said no to me yet. So that's the good news. I didn't think this was going to get figured out right away, but basically I've not been told no yet. And it sounds like it's in my power. So now keep in mind, the vice chancellor could always say, no, we really need the money. Claudia's good for it. So we're going to make her pay.
Right.
But if they are truly saying it's my choice, then I'm going to still push for it here. So it's making progress. I mean, no one else is pushing for it. So apparently I'm the only one that's pushing for it here. But my chair did support me in asking for it and changing it. So we're making small points of progress.
That's good to hear.
Next week, do the same thing. Don't log off till last, because that will be able to either remind me to get on people to tell me something, because we obviously don't want to wait too long here now at this point. Yep. So so just make sure to log off last again next week, so that it reminds me to either get on it again or to update you more.
Okay, I'll be sure to keep that in mind. Thank you so much, Professor. I appreciate it.
Not a problem.
Again.
Not a problem. Okay, have a good night.
Okay, you too.
Bye.
Bye.